Okay, it's exactly 10:15. We'll have, you click next. So before, there was a discussion several times so far this morning about the B word. I never say the B word out loud, it's a dirty word. We commissioned Gunjan, who is watching online. Many of you have spoken to Gunjan Veda. She is the goddess, amazing creator of this event, actually. And she's sitting in New Delhi watching it right now, probably feeling embarrassed. One of the things she insisted was that we get voices from the field. And so a couple of them were commissioned just for today, and we're going to show one of them now. So hit the next button, and it'll just start all by itself.
Pues al momento de escuchar beneficiaria como persona, uno se siente que solo espera algo que le van a traer como un regalo. Solo esperar las indicaciones que le dan, qué es lo que va a hacer, cómo lo va a hacer en el proceso del proyecto. Primero sorprendida porque la necesidad o la idea que ellos traen es de una organización y no es de la propia comunidad, no nace de la comunidad como una necesidad o una prioridad. No, solamente nos toman en cuenta en la ejecución del proyecto o en la evaluación. Como estar en talleres, estar en evaluación y otros trabajos que se realizan. Es un proyecto de la organización o una institución porque no es una necesidad desde la comunidad y no tienen nuestras propias ideas, nuestras propias decisiones, sino que ellos elaboran el proyecto ellos mismos.
Pues respetando nuestras ideas, escuchando nuestras voces como autoridades de la comunidad y no tomar decisiones por nosotros, al contrario, apoyar nuestras propuestas y acciones, porque somos quienes vivimos nuestra realidad, conocemos nuestras necesidades y también tenemos propuestas para solucionarlos. Lo que necesitamos es que esto sea complementado con el acompañamiento de las organizaciones.
Okay, next. So, Mary Kate, we'll introduce the next section.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Kate Costello, the Senior Policy Analyst and UN Representative for the Hunger Project here in our DC office. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Asma Latif, the Director of Bread for the World. She will be joining us as the moderator, and she has been with Bread for the World since 2007. She is responsible for implementing the Institute's analysis, advocacy, and education on policy issues related to U.S. and global hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. Since 2010, she has also been involved in efforts to establish and support the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, which I'm sure many of you have been a part of. She now serves on the Sun Movement's Executive Committee. Ms. Latif has a master's degree in economics from the University of Maryland, a postgraduate diploma in economics from the London School of Economics, and a bachelor's degree in geography from McGill University. She has more than 20 years of experience in public policy and extensive experience in developing and implementing policy advocacy strategies. Ms. Latif was Director of Policy and Programs at Citizens for Global Solutions, and a Senior International Policy Analyst in the Government Relations Department of Bread for the World. In 2003, she led Bread's campaign to support the establishment of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. She also co-chaired a national coalition that worked on its authorization, funding, and implementation. She has also worked for the International Labour Organization and the UN Conference on Trade and Development. Ladies and gentlemen, Asma Latif and the rest of our next panel.
smooth? Okay.
Great. So we have a great panel. Michelle, please join us. So can everyone, is this good?
Yeah.
Yeah? Great. So we have a wonderful panel today to discuss a very important topic. And really, I was really struck by this topic. It's not the kind of conversation that we usually have in Washington. Talking about the way we talk about our work and development in general. And so I'm really excited about the conversation. We're going to do an interactive approach. Mary Kate suggested one that I think will be really good. So I will introduce our panelists, and then I will pose a question to them, and then I'll pose the same question to all of you to bring your perspectives in, and then we'll go for a second round of questions, and we'll do the same thing over again. So listen quite carefully to the question. So we have a great panel today. Michelle McKenzie, I'll start with you first, and then Loha, and then Wubshet. We'll go in that order for the questions. Michelle is with the U.S. African Development Foundation. She's held several positions there, doing programming as well as monitoring and evaluation. Michelle leads U.S. ADF's participation in the U.S. government's interagency for the Global Food Security Strategy Feed the Future. Michelle also served with the Peace Corps in Niger as a community and youth education advisor to the Ministry of Education, and as a Peace Corps response volunteer in Mozambique, where she worked as a community and gender integration coordinator for USAID funded agribusiness promotion project. She has a master's degree in international development from the American University. Nabiha, I've known for a long time, partners in crime. Nabiha is executive director of the No Waste Lives Coalition, where she leads advocacy, financing, policy development, and civil society mobilization efforts to scale up the prevention and treatment of acute malnutrition in high-burden African and South Asian countries. She also serves as the president and CEO of Humanitarian Global, an international development agency based here in Washington, with more than 20 years of public health, nutrition, agriculture, and early childhood development expertise. Nabiha has also worked with Fleischman Hillard and the Clinton Foundation's Global HIV/AIDS Initiative, and implemented advocacy and community programs for UNICEF. Nabiha speaks countless languages, and as we heard that today, do you dream in it?
Depends what country I'm in.
She has a bachelor's degree in political science and journalism from Kansas State University, and a master's degree in international affairs from Columbia. And last but not least, my colleague here at Bread for the World, Wubshet Loha, is a senior global nutrition policy analyst in our government relations department. He's working on engaging Capitol Hill on nutrition issues and getting them excited about accelerating progress on nutrition. He has a decade of experience leading development and humanitarian interventions in Ethiopia, Jordan, and Yemen. Wubshet has worked with the government of Ethiopia and various international NGOs such as Save the Children, IMC, and Action Against Hunger. He graduated from SIT with a master's in sustainable development. So, great panel here today to discuss the important question of words and why they matter. So that's my first question to you. Why do words matter from your perspective, especially when we talk about our work in development? And what does the word beneficiary mean to you? And I'll start with you, Michelle.
Thank you, Asma. Actually,
currently at the U.S. African Development Foundation, the word beneficiary doesn't mean anything to us because we struck it. We struck that word from our lexicon well over 10 years ago when we sort of redesigned our policies to start calling our grants investments, because what we were doing was investing in local communities and in local capacity. Because for us, and I'll just back up and give a little bit of context about the U.S. African Development Foundation. So it is an independent agency of the U.S. government formed by Congress in 1980 to do grassroots development.
We've got zillions of people online listening.
To do grassroots development in Africa, and our mission is to help local communities engage in economic development activities move further along from where they are. So it's not to go in and sort of implement programs for them. We have a very Africa-led or community-led approach where they come to us with what they decide are the issues, and then we work with them through a participatory development approach to find solutions to the problems that they approach us with. So we have not used the word beneficiary for a very long time. And what we consider ourselves to do in this space of development is really to invest in communities and their aspirations.
Great. Thank you. Nabiha?
That's great. So,
Why do
words matter?
And
Yeah.
what is the word beneficiary?
Yeah.
connote?
So words do matter, and I think when we use the word beneficiary, it's incredibly disempowering, and I think also it demonstrates whether that's intentional or not, but our value system and the true intention that there might be to empower and shift the power. I think that's the hashtag. Shift the power dynamic and shift who owns the voice and who drives the voice in a given community. With No Wasted Lives, which is a multi-sectoral coalition, we've had this discussion internally where we don't use beneficiary in our conversations. In fact, I always raise this question of who is our ultimate customer? Who is our ultimate consumer? And they're children, right? That's the audience, those are the constituents that we're ultimately serving with No Wasted Lives. And those who impact children are the conduits to reach them. But we don't use the word beneficiary, and I know we'll get into this, but then we have to ensure that the system is course corrected as well. When we're talking about RFPs, when we're even talking about language that may not be beneficiary, there's a word that I dislike, which is called caseload. And we're talking about children and families and mothers who are affected by acute malnutrition. And you know, the quantification in terms of a number of cases, you say, what is the caseload in a given country? So it is deeply disempowering, and I think it removes the human element behind everything that we're trying to do.
Thank you. Wubshet.
All right, thank you, John, for the opportunity. And I think this is important conversation to be having. As someone from rural Ethiopia, where lots of international NGOs as well as development actors try to address problems in sort of short-term, quick fix programs that actually don't take the local wisdom into account. I can tell you, people really don't want to be seen as a passive beneficiary or as from the vulnerability point of view or as a victim. There are a lot of strengths and capacities that people and communities can actually bring to the table. I think it's really important while we are discussing about shifting paradigm and I think sort of influence change in a power structure. Word really matters. It can either inspire to engage or to decide in their own development, or it can actually exclude people from being part of that. It can inspire people to actually kill other people. So I think words are really important. In my community, for example, where I am from, it's rural village, agrarian village where people have enormous capacity, social capital, reciprocity, people share wisdom, share resources. And also I think there are formal and informal structures in place where often development partners overlook. So I think that I think makes perfect sense and case not to actually address people from the gaps and vulnerabilities point of view. Instead, I think to focus on capacities and strengths, and for that, I think we need to raise beneficiary. That's a good starting point.
Thank you all. Lots to think about. So words can be disempowering, they can be inspiring, they can be excluding, they can incite. We've already had some discussion of possible alternatives, but before we get to that, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. So why do words matter from your perspective? And what do you think about the word beneficiary? What will we lose if we lose that word?
I decided to be the first respondent because this word by itself is very personal to me.
Actually, that's what in the room is difficult, so we want to stand up.
Actually, that location, so if you can move.
Join our panel.
So this is very personal to me, like Wubshet said, I grew in Ethiopia. So there were a lot of NGOs in our area. They come to our area. So they miss one important thing. We know our problem, we know what the solutions are. But we don't have is the resource and the tools. But they come to us with a package solution and they tell us our problem that we have been living with it. So there is a miss there. So this word directly translated into Ethiopian Amharic, they call us Rakami. That means receivers or users. We are for a kind of utilitarian purpose. It is very, it minimizes a human being to the receiving it. I never liked it when I was a little kid. So, whenever they give you, of course, because of the position you are or we were, I had to take it, but it didn't please me never. So that led me after being a beneficiary. I went through the benefit program. It could be school materials, and it could be creating access for water or health centers or building schools. After I went through that and I joined university, I graduated and I came to this country in 2010. I was so lucky enough to meet with one person and we devised a program that shouldn't demonize or minimize people into the receiving end. Or we didn't go to their locality to tell what their problem, what the solution should be, but we went down, we sit with them, we asked them what their problem is, what they took the solution. So that should be the community lead approach and the community lead identifying solution and the community lead knowledge and solution. That's how we use. So that's why I said words really matter. Words could inspire you, words even could kill you, or words could make you useless. Thank you.
Other thoughts?
My name is Ryan Ross. I'm the executive director of Story Tapestries, and I'm a linguist. So for me, words are extremely important. And as NGOs and as organizations, both serving the United States and overseas, we have a terrible tendency to use the word help. That word in itself is incredibly disempowering. It's ineffective. The idea being that you're not helping someone, they're helping themselves. They have their own solutions, they have their own ideas. Perhaps you're providing the capacity, the tools, the advocacy, the space for them to shine their voice, to advocate for their needs. but you are not helping. And I think we use that word all the time.
Hi, my name is Kelly Wilson. I'm with Global Giving, and I share a lot of the concerns about the word beneficiary and the words helping and maybe even the word empower. But as we shift from one set of kind of problematic words to another, I just want to spotlight the words that have been brought forth so far today, like consumer, invest, customer. And I don't want to belittle someone to minimize them to be a receiver or to minimize them to their economic power. And so I wanted to maybe ask broadly if there are kind of what other words and paradigms can we operate in besides one that is colonial and one that is of capitalism.
I'll take 2 more questions and then we'll get back to that point for the next round. How about there? 2 more comment questions.
Hi, my name is Zhang and I recently came here from Vietnam. And why words matter, and I take it from the perspective from what I see myself as a community organizer or a development worker. Not just from the perspective from community, but myself, considering working in development field for more than 20 years. I see when I use the word beneficiary, I see myself as a helper or a fixer. But actually in this, why I am embarking, it's about serving. And I feel when I see myself as a servant, I serve for my own transformation. It's my own journey. I serve for the wonder, in what life unfolds. So it's, for me, it matters for my own journey and my friends and people who are on this journey. So what we are using now is friends, brothers and sisters. Because when we are brother and sister or friends, we emphasize interconnectedness and it's not embedded any power dynamics.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I wasn't going to take the mic, but I wanted to just share, but I just wanted to share a story because it was a very powerful moment for me when I stopped using the word beneficiary. And it was wrenching because we're so deeply immersed in that mindset that I was working with my colleagues in Bangladesh to develop their strategy and their strategy paper. And every time we tried to put pencil to paper, it was like, what do people need? What do people need? It was like, wait a minute, no, this is not right. And I ran across a story by this wonderful guy named Muhammad Anas Rahman, and he was on the first planning commission of Bangladesh. And if you know Bangladesh's history, it went from independence to abject famine in 1 year. And he was on the planning commission having to deal with that famine, and he was spending all his time dealing with emergency food and delivery and shipping and everything else. And he went out to but there was this feeling of real heroism, he said. We felt so heroic fighting this famine. He went out to the villages and people spat on him. They said, and he said, wait a minute, what's the matter? He said, we fought for our independence and you have turned us into beggars. He said, but there was an emergency. I mean, you have this fishing pond here. If someone fell in and was drowning, you would throw them a rope, right? And they looked at him like he was an idiot and said, no, that actually happens here quite frequently. And we know that what you do is you jump in the water with them and swim with them to the edge. And he had to rethink, he said, everything in his upbringing because he had been taught to think of people as little bundles of consumption, as consumption units, when the truth is that people are producers. What makes us human is that we're producers, that we're creators, that we're contributors, not that we're consumers. He said the idea of human needs is a joke. Every animal has those needs. Shelter, food, water. what makes us human is our desire to produce and contribute, and that's what we need to be focused on. And he said, as an economist, you have to rethink everything.
Anybody on this side of the room? Okay, so let's move on to the next question, which I think we've already started down this journey. So are there other words and terms that work better, that don't perpetuate power dynamics? And what process would you use to develop better terminology? And I'll start with you again, Michelle.
I would take that back to how we work as an organization, how we let people lead. So by asking community members, what terminologies do you think we should use, so that we sort of escape what the young lady in the back said, coming up with, you know, these market-based or colonial-based terminologies where we're just doing alphabet soup and changing one word for the next, and then the next word is still problematic in and of itself. So to avoid that, then we need to go to the source. Like, what are the words that we should use when we communicate with you and talk about you? How do you talk about yourselves? And so then the words that we're using are in alignment with how people see themselves. And then that takes us back to then how do we ensure that we're maintaining and ensuring dignity in how we interact with the communities that we serve.
Yeah, I mean, I like the word people, right? But then again,
that could
who
also
am I to say? But I agree with Michelle, and I think all of us in this room would defer to the very communities that we're working with. And in addition to the discussion on how do you want to be referred to, how do we want to refer to ourselves and each other, it's also how do we then expect this to be reflected in the implementation of programs, in sharing results, in ownership of initiatives. Because yes, words matter, but the actions to back up those words perhaps matters even more. Otherwise, it's just lip service. And so I know we'll get deeper into this, but for me, ask the people.
Just to add on that, I agree with everything my fellow panelists said. I think I concur your idea also that there is really high risk, and there is no guarantee that we could that we may not abuse another word, because there are a lot of words that actually are not clear, but I think development communities tend to use. I think empowerment is one, and capacity building. Yeah. We don't often know what it is. I think those words really sound nice, and I think, but I think abuse. So I think it's important to refer back to the community. But I think I really see the problem as bigger than just trying to address with simple change in words. It's important. I think this is the first step. I think a lot of countries, like my country, are doing, getting power. Civil society organizations are getting empowered. But how do we address, for example, funding gaps with for local stakeholders? For example, I was looking at a report by ODI, and I think in 2016 and 17, only 2% of total fund, humanitarian fund, goes to local and national actors. So, while we are still doing those things, will word fundamentally change the way we approach development? I think that's an important question to me. But I think people is a good term to use. I think change agents, I learned that with, while I was working with the Hunger Project. And other words, there are other alternatives also I think that the audience can contribute.
So it seems like these are semantics or words that we have contrived because we're trying to describe a relationship that is based on financial transactions or a way of sharing knowledge or training or whatever it is, imparting something else to somebody else. So I would love to turn to you all now to talk about what words you've come across that work better for you, and what processes you've been part of that lead to better terminology. There's one there and then there.
Good morning. My name is Angela Rayburn. I'm from the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. I guess there's a word that you might have alluded to, and that word is donor, right? Because at the end of the day, this conversation is going to come back to that. Our philosophical approach to giving, to philanthropy, the way we engage with resources is sort of at the core of all the other things, right? So when I see the woman from Guatemala talking and she says, we engage at the level of execution and evaluation, what she's saying is that there was a point way before she got into the conversation where there was a conversation in DC or New York or London where donors got together and decided this is what we're going to fund. And what we're going to fund is not necessarily connected to what anyone wants or needs. So how are we getting to the point of where that conversation happens? Because if we can engage at that level, then we have opportunities to change words. We have opportunity, because what you said is the key. All of this changing of words don't change that part of it. And I, as a person working in development, I'm constantly wondering, when am I going to be at the part where I'm at the donor conversation to when we're sitting back way far away from any recipient and say, oh, we're going to go do this in Vietnam or this in Haiti. How do I know the people there want that? But that's what the donor wants. So that's where we are, I think. And I think at some level, that conversation, maybe it's not here, but it's a conversation that impacts every day the work that we do. Right? Thank you.
Oh, hello, yes, my name is Sherry Donatel. I'm with the Asian American Initiative. I'm Communications Director. This is more in writing when we're corresponding. The words I always stick to are mothers, fathers, children, the community, whether they're students, they're principals, nurses, first responders, leaders, volunteers, artists, and builders. Just off the top of my head. I just try to look at who are they in their communities and not really globally as receivers of any sort. They're always there, whether we're there or not. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Annette Parkey, and I'm not speaking on behalf of any organization right now, but I'll just say a few words that I've heard of different organizations are participant and partner. But I think that it's really important also to bring in other words like donor. And one thing I want to ask that I'll throw out is I've heard a lot of mention of the word community. And since this is community-led development, I also want us to think a little bit about what do we mean when we say community, because it's so hard to define, and who is the community, and how do we work with the community, and with whom do we work?
Okay, we'll go there first, then we'll go there, and then to you.
Tabor Academy with Pramyan Foundation. Beyond words, semantics, sometimes it's important to truly understand the local dynamics on the ground. One underserved community could bully another at-risk underserved community. And case in point, Afghanistan. There are communities, ethno-sectarian communities in Afghanistan that have been completely sidelined from 18 years of international assistance. I guess understanding the local dynamics, truly understanding the local dynamics, could help. Basically, multiple at-risk communities, linguistic communities, ethno-sectarians, regional, could empower them simultaneously.
That's good point.
I'm Barry. Oh, sorry. Barry Shelley, now at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. But I used to work for Oxfam, and like the African Development Fund, Oxfam changed this language quite a long time ago, and the term that is used to describe people with whom we work, and I like to say accompaniment, which is an old term from back in the 1980s, and I don't know where, in different places, but that we really are accompanying communities. But the term that Oxfam still uses is primary change agent, which nothing's perfect, but I like that because you're referring to people as their change agent, and they are the primary change agent. We are also change agents, I hope, but that's, I'm sure there are other possibilities, but that's at least one to consider.
My name is Masfin. I'm from Wubshet. This word has become very powerful, not only because of the word itself, but the way it's being used, the action. Navia mentioned case loads, statistics, dehumanizing, so it's become very powerful, not only because of what it literally means, which is not good, but the way it's being used. And I'm glad it's being raised in such a movement, because it will require such a movement to get it changed once and for all, because there are still a lot of development partners who have this as in the DNA, so which is good that we are discussing today. But I would prefer to use people, more specifically men, women, boys and girls we work with in development, or partners in development, which is more positive and actually reflects what it should be in such cases. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lauren Baker. I'm at USAID. I'd be curious to hear more about what people think of the terminology around partnership and partners. We've been using that a lot more. I'd welcome your reflections on potential concerns with that. And then just noting that being aware of and utilizing locally grounded terminology for respect for leaders. For example, when I coordinate with indigenous leaders in Peru, in many cases they're known as apus. So it's really important to acknowledge, apu. And so you're already even in the way of like person-to-person address involving an acknowledgement that they're recognized leaders within their own communities. And so finding those terms seems like it's helpful as well. Thanks.
Anybody have thoughts about the term partner or partnership?
Can I? Yes. So, is this one? Yes. Partner and partnership, and especially I think when you're talking about that with a large bilateral, multilateral donor, I think there's this element of what is the requirement to be a partner? Am I worthy enough to be a partner? And perhaps the way partnership-led type initiatives have been formed, I would say perhaps there's this perception of you've got to meet a minimum standard to be at the table. And I think what we're talking about is how do you be as inclusive as possible and ensure that anyone, if that's really what you're going after, then you've got to redefine what partnership means for USAID. but that anyone, whether you're a big NGO or a small NGO or a mom or a dad or a grandmother, that you do have a seat at the table. And I think, partnership or being a partner seems to be kind of a big, scary word that perhaps many don't feel they're worthy to be part of that partnership. So you've got to redefine that.
Other thoughts on the process of how you go about developing a better terminology? Any examples from perhaps Oxfam's work or other
So I may say something I'm not sure relevant to, but I think in our context, it's also important not only in English, but say in Vietnamese. And the process of naming is extremely important. Whenever there's a new word that come in, like partners, or recently we work in like service learning or community engaged learning, the process itself, it's so important for local people to, you kind of live it, you experiment it, you own it, and it's a long process. So yes, the word partner, when it translated into Vietnamese, sound very business-like. It's very much like you are selected and a certain entitlement. But that is a language translated by international organizations when they hand it over to local partner. But we ourselves also proactive in how we want to see ourselves. So I would say the process involving of local groups and local partner, we can own that word and in a way add on meaning. Deconstruct it and look at it, but have to live it too. So it's not going to be one meeting or two meetings. It is a process. And so that's some elaboration on this. Thank you.
Michelle, do you want to comment
on the process? I just want to read I think there's the UN Convention on Consumer Protection. I found this while reading. It states, among other things, that consumers have the right to be informed, to be represented and heard in decision-making processes, and the right to redress. So it clearly puts the legal, I think, definition. I think it's important maybe to institutionalize, I think, maybe properly define and make sure that people understand. Also, people own it. I think that can be one way to go about it.
So I don't have anything to say about the process or the word partner, but I would like to go back to about donor and how sort of the idea of what we're doing and who we're doing it with come about from here. And to just make a plug for the U.S. African Development Foundation in terms of how we work, is that we don't design programs here in Washington that we then implement overseas with the communities in which those programs are implemented. All of our work is community-led. So whether it's farmers or entrepreneurs, they're coming to us with their needs, and then we work with them in a true partnership. And all of our staff on the ground is local. We do not have any expats overseas on the ground. So there is a very local approach to what we do. And so there is a little bit of control in terms of terminologies and how the people on the ground who represent us interact with whoever it is that we're working with in those communities and the terminologies that they use with them. Because very rarely are we there as the implementers. We are just there in the background. Because our program is very African-led, we let them lead, and we come through every now and then and we work with our implementing partners on the ground who are the ones who actually do the programming that they work with the communities themselves to put together. So I just want to make a plug for that approach in terms of how development is done and not through the traditional donor format.
Then can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
And ask about how you're having this dialogue. You're on the interagency on the global food security strategy. How are you having this dialogue across U.S. government agencies that are partnering with developing countries or partnering with communities. So with USAID, with MCC, about the terminology, about the way they work with communities.
So we haven't had specific conversations around terminology, and that might be a subject for the next time. Ellie is in the room, who is also on the interagency representing USDA about the terminology that we use. But I think I'll just going back to where we are as a U.S. government on a whole, talking about this journey to self-reliance. Well, that's what ADF has been supporting since its very inception. This is not new for us. This is what we have been doing. It's that kind of approach that we've always taken, that we are there as, and I know we're not using the word help, but is enable a better word? Activate? How do we then say we're allowing people to sort of build on innate capacities that they already have? Catalyze. Capacity strengthening, but people might have, issues. So whatever the right word is, we are then building on what is already there. We are not considering ourselves to be giving anyone anything. I was having a conversation yesterday with another organization that was looking to partner with us, and they were explaining how they work, wherein they have locally registered organizations on the ground like we do, or local partners, but their funding goes to their local partners, who then sort of manage the money for the farmers. And they're wondering if we could do that. I said, well, no, we've moved past that. Actually, we've never been there. We've always given funding directly to farmers or entrepreneurs because we do believe that they have innate capacity to be able to do this. And our version of capacity building is not just training, it's giving them the ability to put what they're learning into practice. So we're never going to just bring you a tractor or build you a warehouse or bring you a piece of equipment. We put that money in your budget, that money goes directly to you, and you learn proper procurement procedure so that you're building that capacity. So as you grow from a livelihood activity into a sustainable business, you have the systems in place to be able to do that sustainably. And then to also break that sort of donor relationship where you're always needing that support. So that's just a little bit about how we operate.
Over there.
Thank you. It's very important to discuss about the term, the beneficiary. But like Wubshet said, replacing this word by something like computer work may not really solve the problem. But what matters is equally the process matters. So what we do in our case, we have 3 questions that should be answered before we go into certain project. The first one is why this project? Why we want to do it? Is it because of the donor interest, or because of the politicians' interest, especially in the developing country, politicians want to use a certain project for their own political benefit, or is it because of the local people? I know it is very hard to put a line what the community or what the local people is, but still. So why we are doing this? So this is the first question. The second one is how? Who is deciding? What the process? How we are going to do? Who is going to be in the front line? Who takes the lead? Then when we answer these 2 questions, the third one, what we are going to do. But the actual thing that we should have the actual project, so that what answer should come from the first 2 steps. I think the process itself will take care of whether if we change the terminology, the word without changing or addressing the process, still it will be in the same vicious circle.
Oh, we got so many mics. To me, one of the important words that's coming up that we didn't put in this program is system. So issues of respect for leaders reflects existing systems within a community that people may be happy with or not happy with. So understanding And the point was made also early on that our language, we're struggling to find language to express a right relationship. And understanding that system, the question for me is always, if things were working for these folks, how would they be working? So what would working look like for them? It would be a bigger local budget, or it would be this marginalized group that has had no voice ever, has gotten organized and gotten a seat at the table in their local system. But what is that system, and what are people's vision for that system? And then, because I think that underlies our relationship, how we see and interface with people's own systems from our system, and that then kind of filters our ability to rightly see our relationship with people.
So, for me, it comes back to sometimes that donor piece. I apologize, I remember what your words, but not your name. But I know that I wrote a grant yesterday about changing power dynamics and narrative and about systemic racism, and all I thought about was all the words that they used to describe their RFP are all the words that made me want to be ill. And I literally was like, but I have to use these words in my RFP response in order to trigger their buzzword response to make sure they recognize that I am writing what they want. When the reality is that I've had 20 community meetings and the community has said this is what we want, and can you help us to find the funds to make it happen? And the process is not me telling them what to do or me putting words in their mouth. It's me shutting up. I'm a storyteller, that's really hard. But it is, it's me shutting up and me listening. But the donors, in some ways, I feel like, put a hamper around our ability to shut up. My husband is African Brazilian, and he despises the word development. He was like, Brazil's not a developing nation. He's like, why? Why do we put the word develop? Why is your country first world and our country second world or third world? He's like, it's so demeaning and disrespectful to tell me or to tell someone that I need to develop my skills.
Well, my husband hates the word high-level gathering. He hates it. Are you going to the high-level gathering? Theme of the UN, right?
Hi, this is Horta from World Vision, but I'm not going to talk as part of World Vision. I lead a small subgroup that has been dealing with, is part of the community-led development, and it's working on a meta-analysis. So we had a very heated debate on what to use on our rubric, because many of us understood that, okay, we do not want to use to refer to people as beneficiaries, but then what are the alternatives? And then obviously the first alternative was participant. And then some of us brought the same example that you brought, Nabia, where it's like if we work for children and the end result is for children, but we work for mothers, the mothers are the participants, well, what do we call these other people? So then we went around in circles, very heated debates. We ended up several of our meetings with like, okay, there is no solution, we understand the concept. We know what we want to do, we just don't have the right word for it. Then we ended up with people, but in the process, what got unpacked was that that point that you were making, that the community, we kept talking about community as one thing. Communities come with so many power dynamics that are that also need the shifting, and they may not be the right ones. So when we talk about community-led development, the community is not one piece and one of the players, and we are talking about shifting those relationships that are not right even among those communities. So then the next term came, okay, no, we are working about the most vulnerable. And then some of us were like, well, that is also derogatory in its own way, because it is the most vulnerable, but the most vulnerable already places somebody at the corner because of their vulnerability. So then now we got down a rabbit hole that was even bigger. Not only couldn't we use beneficiary, we had the power dynamics within a community, and we had the most vulnerable that we couldn't even figure out how to call at the end. We ended up with the concept of like, okay, we're gonna stick to people, and then we're gonna describe what do people want, what kind of relationships we want to see at the best status that we had ever. And we ended up, there was the voice, but then the power dynamic, that element that one of the members brought, was that somebody having a voice, it's not enough. So being heard, it's the ultimate status that we want to get with the community-led development. So our rubric now, it's a little bit hodgepodge of like old people, but with voice and being heard. And I'm looking forward to a little bit more of the discussions over here, and we can for sure incorporate some of this language that is coming in the our community, yes, in the rubric that we're developing for community-led development.
Great, thank you.
Can I raise something? So I think one other piece for us to think about is the intention behind the word beneficiary, and what are the threats if we change that, right? Because ultimately you want highly engaged, you want communities that are empowered and resilient, etc. And by now shifting this to where you have communities that are, and we can, I understand that there's baggage with the word community as well, problems with that, but just bear with me on this. Is now you foster communities that are informed and empowered to seek out services, to ask for what they need to live their best life, versus passively be on the receiving end of a gift, of a check, of a decision. And so when you shifted and you created this, not only the word, but also the systems and the approach, you end up having, yes, this element of empowerment. And what does that lead to? Demanding accountability, demanding transparency, and demanding a seat at the table. And let's be brutally honest here about this. Oftentimes it's not in the best interest of government leaders to have them at the table, to have communities at the table. It's not in the best interest of donors. With all due respect, USAID, with DFID, etc., then you're going to have ultra-empowered communities saying, we want this, that, and the other, or guess what? We reject what you're offering because it doesn't work for us, right? It also threatens the mandate and the remit of international NGOs, of UN agencies. So if we don't talk about the potential threats that go along with changing the language in the system, I think we're going to be in an echo chamber where we're having a well-intentioned conversation, but we're not really transforming and pushing for real sustained change on what that means from an implementation, impact, and inclusivity perspective. Are we ready for that?
Well, I couldn't have asked for a better segue.
It was planned. We've lived together for far too long this month.
So, the next question was, once we've got the right terminology, how do we promote it so that it's adopted, so that we don't have to answer RFPs that give us nausea, and that donors are also using the same terminology? Maybe we need to think about the word donor, that terminology. So, yes, so how do we promote it? How do we get this adopted?
Hi, Ann Kuntz with Relief International. I think on that I'm promoting it, and what we seem to all be struggling with is it's not so easy to come up with a term that's going to resonate from our perspective. When I say our perspective, people who are sitting here in the West, whether folks originally came from the West or not, but having to work from that lens, going through donors, our NGO structures. But something that I saw done in the early 90s I thought was interesting, for some of the donors allowed us, and USAID allowed us, we had to take their RFP terminology, what it was that year, you had it, but then we had a table that we had a discussion with the people we were working with in the country and ask them what the terms they would put on it, what they wanted to be called, what they wanted the actions to be, and the priorities, and it was a translation table. The same way you would have, we have legal documents that might have Arabic on one side and English. So we actually used that translation. So we had to report up to the donors, and it was maybe a term that we wouldn't have chosen personally, but what was used at the local level for the activities had the terminology that was driven from the community.
Michelle, do you want to comment on this question?
About how do
you promote so that it's adopted more broadly and vision?
So Nabia said a whole lot and dropped and dropped a lot of truth bombs, and I think it starts with the willingness and openness for on the donor side of things to really think differently about, and when I say we, putting myself in that donor category because I do work for a foundation, how we think about who we are, what role we play in development, and whether that role is in the driver's seat or sort of somewhere in the passenger seat providing whatever is the word that I don't yet have for what we're doing. And just that willingness to think more creatively about how we do this thing called development. Like, what are we trying to achieve for whom? Like, who is at the crux of all of this? And what is it that they need? And how do we as donors then come up with the right methodology? But then there are so many things connected to that, right? So much politics about how as donors, how we get our money and what those priorities are linked to. So I think it's really a hard challenge. Not that it's insurmountable, but it's just quite difficult.
By way of background, why is USAID's approach so different than other U.S. government agencies?
So we're an independent agency of the government. So we're also a corporate entity. And we were actually modeled off of the Inter-American Foundation that was created, I think, some 12 to 15 years before to do grassroots development in Latin America. And then Congress decided, well, let's do something for Africa. And so it was excited. It was very strategic about how we were going to be placed and to do work quite differently than how it was being done at the time. And it was actually quite then sort of revolutionary for us to be doing what we were doing, how we were doing it, and to then now realize that, well, other people are trying to now evolve into the way that we've always sort of approached the work that we do, where we do it, with whom we do it, and how, the process of how we do it. So we're very grateful to have had the ability to do our work the way we've been able to do it for the past 4 years.
Wubshet, do you want to come in on this question of how you promote the use of the right language?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to have similar forums at different levels, at country level, as well as at district level, where organizations operate, and I think where the movement for community-led development happens. Just to share, I spoke to, while preparing for this session, I spoke to some of my ex-colleagues in Ethiopia, and I think Yemen and other places, if they have problem with the word beneficiary, they've never thought of that before. Really, is that even a problem? These are people who are, who actually work in different parts of the world in humanitarian response and development programming. So I think conversation is important. Dialogue is important. I think we are having this conversation here, but if we don't translate this conversation at various levels, I don't think we would succeed in at least shifting, changing terminology.
Thank you. So this question of how do you promote the use of the right language, I think we reject the wrong language. And so I have, an idea, 2 ideas. Maybe John with Community-Led Development Group, you guys can build this out. But what if we, and maybe it's there, what if we had, let's just be very practical, an RFP opportunity, right? Or we're talking to a donor and there's tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on the table, and the language that's used throughout the RFP is beneficiary. Could we agree as a community and advocate to our leadership that we will make the statement in the response saying we reject the word beneficiary and instead use this, or this is our approach. And so to complement that, working also with national leadership and with domestic civil society, telling the big donors, telling the big implementing agencies that do not refer to our people and our country as a beneficiary. And so I think if we put it out there and we say we're taking charge of this language and how we go about our work, and we're informing you and have some type of agreement among the community, that maybe that's one way to start shifting how we act and talk about this.
Great, 2 ideas on the table.
I think it's going to take more than responding to RFPs. I think there's got to be a very strategic work with donors. And for real community-led development, in my mind, donors have got to be willing to fund projects that don't have goals, that are long-term, exactly the opposite of what everybody wants to fund. They want results in 3 years. And if you are really, there are going to be times where a community comes to like ADF or some other place and they already have a plan, and then you can fund that. But if we're really going to have pervasive community-led development, then we have to be talking about what I would call evolutionary theories of change that don't. The goal is to find a goal, right? But not one that you're devising. And so, if we or individual particular organizations can start being much more proactive and taking initiative to form relationships with certain donors, and then use those as examples of where it actually works, and finding a little bit of money here or there, making proposals that are not from RFPs, and then using those as an example. I think that's the only way that you're, in terms of the funding of these things. Now the other question is, what can be done without these donors? And I think there are some things there that can be done too, by the little bit of fungible funds that organizations have, is start small and do something, and then use those as an example, publicize it, show the results. But this is long-term stuff. This is not 3 years. This is 8, 10, 15 years of work, and you're not starting with a clear program project with all the strategies and all the theories of change all worked out.
We've been talking a lot about donors as government donors. What about the role of philanthropy in potentially changing the narrative?
If there's ever a piece of silence, I'll fill it. Recently, a lot of us have been able to pioneer new ways of working with people because of private philanthropy. Private philanthropy has made that possible. Lately, a lot of advisors to individual philanthropists have been training them to be little USAIDs and teaching them about log frames. And this is like selling heroin. We need to intervene at that level, because but the other thing is that there are opportunities, and I do think with this administration, with Bonnie and Mark Green and others, and some mechanisms that were started. There are these BAAs that are coming out, more and more, and I've talked to some groups that have done GDAs, Global Development Alliances, where the thing really is co-created. And there was a lot of money on the table in these things. So I think this idea that we can only intervene with small projects, that's certainly one step. But we will need a broad strategy that does promote the importance of this. This is the ownership that comes from it. To find those words that resonate with everybody, like ownership. I think there's no donor agency in the world that wouldn't like to see ownership. Even the groups that used to like dependency have kind of gotten off of that drug. So I think there's a lot that we can do collectively on this. Other buzzwords that have become an opening for this: collective impact, looking at contribution rather than attribution. So there's a whole basket of things that we can work with together, and certainly that the movement can help promote to seize every opportunity to promote this.
Thanks, just briefly. So another word that I wanted to throw out there was truth, right? I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but I just think the gentleman from Oxfam, because I too come from Oxfam, so maybe there's some synergy there, I don't know. But I guess maybe when I worked in Haiti, I would hear all the time everyone saying, we are going to work ourselves out of a job. It has never happened, right? Every person, every organization I met in Haiti after the earthquake said things in a very happy way. Oh, we've been here for 50 years. I think if you've been here for 50 years and you're still here, then you've failed. It's not working. So maybe the conversation with donors about how we change, maybe we need to say, hey, over the last 50 years, this is what you guys have been spending. And we have been failing across the globe on many levels. So maybe the conversation is to start with failure. And maybe that would be like an eye-opener, maybe, and then maybe we can go from there and work backward. That's just my impression. Thank you.
There's a question back there, and then there, and then
comment. There's actually been a lot of really good writing and good books coming out in the past year about this, so I just wanted to survey the audience and see how many people have read Decolonizing Wealth this year. It's a great book, and for professionals in this arena, and especially donors, and also winners take all. Yeah. So I'd recommend those two books to a long answer for this question.
Great.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for those suggestions.
In terms of who should be part of this conversation, hi, I'm Tunja Rastogi, Bread for the World, and formerly with the World Food Program. And having seen communities in different contexts, I think the terminology is so important to building trust and in having programs that have an impact. Words that are so important are empowerment, dignity, choice. And so you see programs where big organizations are implementing voucher programs. They're not bringing anything into the community. They're helping to support local supermarkets where, out in Jordan, these huge refugee camps, but these are consumers who are able to go to the store and have the choice. And that simple shift in programming has helped support the dignity of so many people. So I think that's really important. And in terms of who should be involved with these, is CSO communities. They understand what the local context is, and I think what we're not talking about here are national governments. So no aid organization can really get into a country unless that national government does it. And so the national government also needs to be educated, and CSOs need to be part of that dialogue at the local, regional, and national levels to start re-educating them on how to engage.
Other comments or thoughts? role of the national government. So a lot of people have mentioned, and Kanuja started to get to this, how do you change the programming? How do you change implementation? How do you change the process right from the beginning, from design? And how does that help live out this the new terminology? Any reflections on that?
So I think someone here had made the comment about building on, or potentially course correcting, redirecting where we are now, and I want to talk a little bit about what's being done right now in the wasting space on acute malnutrition, because I think this is a great example of tools and assets that can be shared with community members to lead. So, there are about 49.5 million children under 5 who are affected by wasting. It's one of the most severe forms of malnutrition. That number has barely changed. Heavy burden in South Asia and in Africa. And we're reaching less than 20% of children with treatment. Treatment largely being led by UN agencies because of the history of where wasting lived, which was more in the humanitarian context. Because it has traditionally been led from an outside institutional model of work, there's been very little empowerment effort over the trajectory of when wasting interventions came about, of putting the tools and the power in the hands of mothers and fathers and grandmothers. And I brought this to show, do you all know what this is? So this is a MUAC tape, and it's, you put this in, you put it around the arm of the child, and it's a very simple tool to show if your child is at risk of wasting or is wasted. And so at some point, an NGO working with the community had a brilliant idea of saying, why don't we just give this to moms? Mm-hmm. Like, why do we have to have health workers and doctors and nurses and very important people do this when the most important person is the mother, is the father, is the grandparent, who should be able to assess and evaluate? And so this is being, I share this because it's being implemented in certain communities, and yes, it's a tool, but it's a tool of empowerment, and it's shifted systems and techniques that were often relegated to big institutional partners to say, hey, we don't necessarily need to do it. This other member in the community, maybe they don't have an MD behind their name, but they're probably better equipped, because ultimately then they're empowered and they're informed, but they're also empowered to seek out the support and the services. And so I think we need to look at programs and say, what are the pieces that we don't need to own? Are we okay with that? What are the pieces that we don't need to own anymore to get to more families, to get to greater impact, and to really build a resilient response to whatever development topic we're trying to tackle?
Other thoughts?
The panel can speak first.
No, go.
Well, I'm feeling empowered by Amina and this young woman down front and a few other people to ask some hard questions. And so I wanted to also, this is something I've been thinking about for the last few minutes, is what are the assumptions behind development? And the assumptions are that people need to change, right? People need to live different lives. They need to change the way they think, the way they act, the way they eat, the way they do all these things. And this young man right here talked at the beginning about resources and bringing resources to the community. And I think that one of the assumptions we need to think about is the fact that from the very beginning, development didn't want to trust national governments with resources. And so we didn't want to invest in the health system or in the education system or whatever it was in the country, because we thought that the national government couldn't do that right. So we had to bring in all these NGOs and all these implementing partners to do it for them. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, those assumptions that are driving a lot of what is going on. So I'm not offering any solutions here right now, but just want to throw that out.
Other comments? So John, I want to put you on the spot.
Yes, sir.
Because a lot has been put on the table. How are we going to move this discussion forward out of this room?
Okay, how to move it forward? A working group. That's always the answer, right? So, you know, the movement exists to do what we need done to transform the way the world does development. That's why we're in existence. And I think, you know, the work that was mentioned earlier around this evaluation program is a good example. There are enormous resources in our organizations that can be brought to bear on this. And Holta is one of 35 professionals across 23 organizations that are working on this one initiative to really do a meta-synthesis on what have we learned to date in the NGO community about this. So I think this, you know, if language, that was the phrase on the program, if language is the window to the heart, we can have a language as the window to the heart working group. But I also really appreciate the comment that Wubshet made. I would suggest, and we have a monthly call to strategize everything in the movement. Everybody's invited to this call. But most importantly, at the district level, you know, the real front lines of kind of where resources tend to stop and not reach people. You know, that district level coordination, national level coordination, moving the conversation out there, I think, is a very good place to start, because that's where more and more of it's going to happen. And then I also think, you know, I love the recommendations around how to interface with the interagency, because I do think we're at a moment in the U.S. government's evolution on this subject where there's an opening for real change. And if that's a real opportunity, we should seize it. So those are two things I see. And I'm really, we're recording this whole thing so that all the things I forget, since I'm a geezer, we can go back and figure out.
Great. So I'm going to turn to the panel for, I think we have to wrap up soon, am I?
Yes, you're right.
So 2-minute wrap up. I'll start with Wubshet this time.
Right. Finally. I think maybe there are two things I want to say. So we work in policy advocacy here, and I think we haven't mentioned much how much transnational advocacy can play in shifting you know, the language, actually advocating for increased investment through you know, local channels, through local government and local stakeholders. So I think there is you know, a role that we could play. Because there are a lot of good initiatives coming out. For example, a new partnership initiative by USAID. Well, it actually aims to diversify partners, you know, local partners, marginalized partners, and to try to bring those to the table. I think instead of advocating against those kind of initiatives, which I have seen, it's important, I think, to encourage those kind of efforts. I think the second point I want to say, I think true empowerment actually threatens the position of the power holder. I think, you know, it's really important that if we are serious about doing development differently, I think it's not going to be a win-win. I don't think we will stay in a position that we are now. To a certain extent, we have something to share. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Michelle? So my final takeaways, they're quite simple and straightforward, and it's kind of embedded in what we've already been doing, is to continue to let locals lead. To listen, to learn, and then also to think more broadly about what we're doing in the development space. Going back to what the person, sorry about your name, about sort of just looking at our track record over the past 50 years and taking that as our starting point to figure out how do we then evolve the development space to meet the goals of development and sort of redefining what it is that we're trying to do and the process for doing that.
So it is Gandhi Day. And in 1947, the Indian subcontinent became independent from the British. And what resulted was a division of the subcontinent into East and West Pakistan and India. I'm Pakistani, and my grandmother would tell me the story of how, and it was those who went to East and West Pakistan and those who came from East and West Pakistan into what then became India. It's among the largest, if not the largest, migration in the history of the world. And it happened because, yes, we know the political consequences of all of that, but also out of deep hope and optimism that the way forward would be better, right? That family members and communities would have independence and be empowered and no longer be under control and dominance of the British Empire. And so my grandmother tells this story after they landed in Pakistan from Rajasthan of this great hope and these great risks, of course, that people took going over borders. And so they abandoned homes, they abandoned land, they abandoned jobs, they abandoned everything to go to these newly formed countries, independent countries. And my grandmother says, when they had to line up for the ration, when they had to line up for hours to receive a cube of ice to keep their food cold, it was incredibly disempowering and eventually sobering, because you realize that the words that they had great hope in were not the reality when they got to the ground. And I share that because if we're going to change language and change words, the systems and the processes need to match the promise. Otherwise, this is all lip service, and we're doing this with potentially good intentions, but not really digging into the tough questions that need to be answered.
Great. What an amazing panel, and I also want to thank all of you. There's such expertise and wisdom and great questioning in the room. So thank you very much, John and team, for the opportunity.
Thank you again.
Have a seat, and Matt's going to do the next bit.
Thank you all again. Just a little bit more here, and we're going to break for lunch. So similar to this morning, if you could pull out your smartphone and go back to the URL. So we've had a lot of discussion about what words matter, how our words affect everything that follows after that. And so after this discussion, I think it'd be great to get people's feedback on what this conversation has done as far as reflection of what new words, what new phrases, how we speak and how we refer to things. So feel free just to throw a few thoughts in, take some time, and let's see what comes up. So here, partner is extremely popular. Referring to people as they are men, women, and children. Leaders and agents of change. We heard a lot of that during the discussion. We're capturing these word clouds, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So all these word clouds are being saved, and so we'll be able to send these around afterwards for further reflection. to the next. Oh, there's
Lunch break.
What do you think about the lunch break? Give me 1 or 2 words, please. So lunch is on its way. We'll be setting it up shortly. So in the meantime, I think we're done. So thank you very much.
Let me just address
one more logistic. Talking in the mics. So Casey's been very kindly taking pictures throughout the morning and will in the afternoon. Those will be available in some way for all of you to access and download after the event. So we'll send that information out after the event.
Great. So, and by the way, I think this is probably needs a battery. So those of you online, there are people online watching this, in India at least, but there's been about a dozen or so people following. So we'll be taking a lunch break, and we're just going to leave this streaming, and we'll pick it up thereafter. Oh, actually, no. We're going to stop the stream. We're going to restart it at the end of lunch. I realize I don't know. I haven't.